County sits in the middle of northern Arkansas, deep in the Ozark Plateau, where the limestone bedrock has been dissolving for so long that the ground underneath the cedar ridges and hardwood hollows is more absence than presence. Chambers and passages and vertical shafts running through the rock in a network that the surface gives no indication of. Nearly 2,000 documented caves lie beneath the northern half of this state, most of them on private land. Most of them known only to the local farming families, whose fields they drain, and the small, close-knit community of spelunkers, who have spent decades mapping them. They are not famous caves. They do not have gift shops, or guided tours, or paved walkways with handrails. They have entrances half hidden by cedar scrub, and passages that go where they go, and they ask you to meet them on their own terms. Rourke Cave is one of those. A wild cave, undeveloped, approximately 300 feet of passage on 2 levels, sitting somewhere in the cedar country of Stone County, in the way that hundreds of Arkansas caves sit, available to those who know it is there, and willing to get muddy enough to see what it contains. In the late summer of 1977, 4 men decided to go into it with cameras. They were not beginners. The 4 of them, Smith, Schroeder, Alderman, and Blackfeather, were experienced outdoorsmen, occasional cavers, the kind of people who knew the difference between a casual hike and a technical cave, and understood enough about the underground to equip themselves reasonably and move through it with appropriate care. The purpose of this particular trip was photography. A magazine photo essay, the kind of project that takes people into places they might not otherwise go and asks them to stay long enough to get the image right. Cave photography in 1977 was a particular kind of technical challenge. The darkness is absolute, and your lights are whatever you've carried in. And the formations that look extraordinary to the naked eye in a headlamp beam require careful arrangement of light sources and long exposures, and the patience to wait for the frame to settle before you fire the shutter. It is slow, deliberate work, and it requires moving through the cave with more attention to the space around you than a simple transit would demand. Stopping in rooms, looking up at ceilings, standing in positions that exploration alone would not require. They entered Rourke Cave and worked their way inward, deeper into the 2-level system, the cameras and lights adding weight to what they carried, but not changing the fundamental character of the movement through the cave. Careful, deliberate, single file through the passages, the headlamps finding each new section of rock as they went. Some distance in, they reached a room. It was the kind of room that Arkansas cave systems produce in their 2-level passages, a chamber where the geology has opened the rock vertically, leaving a floor at 1 level and a ceiling considerably higher, and in between them, a pit. Not a vast pit, not the kind of drop that announces itself with drama. A pit of perhaps 15 feet, the kind of vertical feature that a caver's or notes routes around and factors into the movement of the group with the same matter-of-fact attention paid to any other obstacle in a cave passage. Along the wall of the room, above the pit, there was a crawl ledge, an opening in the rock roughly 20 feet up, that appeared to offer an alternative route out of the chamber. Smith saw it and decided it was worth investigating. A second passage, a shortcut, the possibility of a better composition for the photo essay. Any of these reasons would have been sufficient, and perhaps it was all 3 simultaneously, the way decisions accumulate in the moment of making them. He asked Schroeder to spot him. The plan was for Schroeder to bridge the pit, to position himself across it, 1 foot on each side, braced against the rock walls, and to provide a spot for Smith as he climbed the wall toward the crawl ledge 20 feet above. It is the kind of arrangement that works in certain geometries and doesn't work in others. And in this particular room, with this particular pit, Schroeder tried to bridge it and could not. The span was too wide, the rock too smooth, the geometry of the pit not amenable to the technique that would have made the spot possible. Smith climbed without a spot. He was 15 feet up the wall, 15 feet above the edge of the pit, when his footing gave way. He fell backward, not forward, not sideways. Backward, the worst direction in a room, with a pit behind you, the direction that takes you away from the wall and over the edge and into the space you were trying to stay above. His head and shoulders struck the edge of the pit on the way down, the rock meeting him with the indifference that rock brings to all such meetings. And then the edge was gone, and he was falling the rest of the 15 feet into the pit floor. And when he hit the bottom, he didn't stop. He careened down a 25-foot talus slope below, a cascade of loose angular rock that carried him to the bottom of it, where a pool of water waited. The people watching from the room above had no way to process what they had just seen in the time that it took to happen. One moment, Smith was 15 feet up the wall. The next he was gone, and the sounds that replaced his presence, the impacts, the slide of rock, the final silence at the water's edge, arrived before any of them had fully registered that the fall had begun. Schroeder moved first. He negotiated the difficult route down to where Smith lay. Not the direct route, which was the pit itself, but whatever path the cave offered around it, through the talus, down to the pool. And what he found at the bottom was a man partly submerged in the water, breathing heavily, making no response to voice or touch. The headlamp found his face in the dark, and the damage was immediate and comprehensive. 5 or 6 lacerations across his head, each of them roughly 2 inches long and bleeding with the particular persistence of scalp wounds, which bleed hard and long regardless of their depth. His lips were torn badly. He was breathing, but unreachable, somewhere between consciousness and the absence of it. The heavy, irregular breathing of a man whose brain had received a blow it was still working out how to respond to. Alderman and Blackfeather reached them minutes later. Blackfeather was a licensed practical nurse, a fact that, in the specific context of a man lying partly in a pool of water at the bottom of a cave pit, bleeding from multiple head wounds, was the difference between informed action and improvisation. They moved him out of the water, carefully, and held him against the toeless slope. There was no flat surface, no comfortable position, nowhere safe to put a person in the geometry of that space. But they kept him out of the water and kept his airway clear and stayed with him in the dark while 2 of them went for help. Alderman and Schroeder went out through the cave and ran to the nearest house. They called an ambulance and sent word to Richard Neidhart and John Weaver to bring vertical gear and to Dave Webb to bring blankets. Then they went back in. Back at the pool, Smith had regained consciousness. Not coherent, not the kind of conscious where he could answer questions or understand what was being said to him, but present in a way he hadn't been when they left him. His eyes were open. He was making sounds. The heavy, unconscious breathing had become something lighter and more irregular and more human. The blankets in the sleeping bag arrived. Compresses were applied to the head wounds. He was strapped to a flat board stretcher, positioned carefully so that the board would flex with him at the waist rather than holding him rigid. The question of how to get him out had 2 options: through the pit he had fallen down, which narrowed at the top, or through a corkscrew crawl that connected to another part of the cave. The pit, despite its narrowing constriction, was judged the better route. Neidhart and Weaver rigged the vertical gear. The first attempt to raise Smith in the stretcher failed at the constriction. The stretcher couldn't clear the narrowing at the top of the pit, the geometry of a man on a board not fitting the geometry of the rock above him. They brought him back down, removed the stretcher, tied a rope under his armpits, and tried again. By now, Smith was conscious enough to help, not able to lead the effort, not able to make decisions, but conscious enough to understand that when someone told him to push with his feet or shift his weight, he could do it, and he did. He came up through the constriction. He cleared the top of the pit. Once on the flat ground above, a safety line was attached, and 2 cavers walked him on his own feet, with assistance on either side, through the remaining passages of Rourke Cave to the entrance. He was hoisted up 2 more climbs near the exit. He was helped down 1. At the cave mouth, 2 men assisted him up the steep trail to the surface where the ambulance was waiting. The September air of the Arkansas Ozarks, sitting warm and thick after the cave's constant cool. The hospital found what the cave had done in its accounting: multiple lacerations to the head and lips, a mild concussion, and a chipped vertebra. He was hospitalized for a week. The chipped vertebra is the detail that lands differently when you read it. A structural injury to the spine, discovered after the fact, after the rope under his armpits, and the walk through the passages and the climb up the steep trail to the surface. He had been moved through all of that with a damaged vertebra that nobody knew about, in a cave where the alternative to moving him was leaving him at the bottom of a talus slope in a pool of water. The incident report notes, quietly, that in dangerous activities people generally want the freedom to take risks as they see fit. It does not say this to excuse what happened. It says it because the man who climbed that wall without a spot made a choice in the moment, the way people make choices in moments. Quickly, on the basis of what seemed reasonable, without knowing how 15 feet above a pit could become the top of a 25-foot talus slope and a pool of water in the space of a single lost foothold. The photo essay presumably was filed with different photographs than the ones they had planned to take that day. In a paddock on a farm near Allendale East, a few kilometers south of Mount Gambier in South Australia, there is a hole in the ground that is roughly 3 feet across. It was discovered in 1938 when a horse stumbled over it, and subsequent exploration revealed that the small surface opening dropped into a flooded cavern of extraordinary size. A main chamber approximately 140 meters long and 80 meters wide. The water inside it startlingly clear, a single shaft of light penetrating from the surface, opening all the way to the white sand floor far below. The whole thing so beautiful that underwater filmmakers came to document it in the 1960s, and the diving community began making pilgrimages to it from across Australia and beyond. They called it the Shaft. By 1973, thousands of dives had been logged in its blue water. Ocean divers came because the visibility was unlike anything they had experienced in the sea, and because the rock pile directly beneath the entrance, a central mound of limestone rubble rising 40 meters from the floor, was genuinely spectacular, the kind of formation that rewarded the trip. The cave had a reputation. The cave had a guest book, sitting in the farmhouse of the family who owned the land, and you signed it before you went in. On May 26, 1973, a group of 9 people arrived from New South Wales to dive it. 8 of the 9 would enter the water. The 9th, Joan Harper, had decided before leaving that she would stay on the surface and prepare hot soup for the others when they came up. She stayed by the hole and waited. The 8 divers were experienced ocean divers, several of them instructors, people who had spent years in the sea and understood the technical demands of scuba equipment in deep water. What they did not have was specific experience in submerged cave systems, which are a different environment from the open ocean in a way that is not immediately obvious until you are inside one and something goes wrong. In the ocean, the surface is always above you. In a cave, the surface is a specific location that you must find and navigate to, through passages that do not rearrange themselves helpfully in the direction you need to go. On May 27th, they completed a preliminary dive, responsible, measured, running a guideline 150 feet into the water, circling the rock pile, returning to the surface with everything intact. They agreed before the second dive that they would not go deeper than 60 meters and would not enter the dark, unmapped tunnel that extended beyond the base of the rock pile into the uncharted interior. They signed the guest book. They had a plan. On the morning of May 28th, 8 divers entered the shaft for the second time. They descended through the clear water in the way the previous dive had proceeded, controlled, methodical, the rock pile rising toward them as they went deeper. At 55 meters, one diver, Robert Smith, began to feel the effects of the depth and turned back toward the surface. He recognized the feeling and he acted on it. And that recognition is the reason he survived. The others continued. At 60 meters, the agreed limit, they kept going, not recklessly, not dramatically, just past the line they had drawn, the way groups sometimes move past the lines they draw when the water is clear and the formation ahead is interesting, and the narcosis is already working in their bloodstream. In the quiet way it works, narrowing the future and softening the judgment without announcing itself as the thing that is softening judgment. They entered the dark tunnel beyond the rock pile, the unmapped passage that extended into the interior of the cave without a guideline. The silt came up around them as they moved through the tunnel, fine particles disturbed from the floor and the walls rising into the water column, turning the remarkable clarity of the shaft into something much closer to the inside of a cloud. The torches, inadequate for this environment, too dim and too narrow for the conditions, caught the suspended particles and threw the light back rather than penetrating it. The visibility collapsed. At some point in the dark, in the silt, at more than 60 meters of depth, the group separated. Survivors reported seeing torches moving frantically through the murk, beams sweeping across the silt cloud, in the way a torch sweeps when the person holding it is searching for something they cannot find. Gordon Roberts signaled back that they were lost. A survivor described Christine Millett and Roberts as looking frightened the last time they were seen. Christine Millett and Gordon Roberts were found nearly a year later, together below the ceiling of the dome they had failed to navigate out of, at 195 feet. Reports suggest they may have been holding each other. They had run out of air. John Bockerman was seen by a surviving diver, swimming strongly downward, deeper into the cave. He was likely deep in the grip of narcosis, and may not have understood what direction he was swimming. His body was found beneath a rock ledge, deeper still. Stephen Millett's body was recovered first, months after the accident, at 15 meters near the entrance, closer to the surface than any of the others, which says everything and nothing simultaneously about what happened to him in the dark. Joan Harper was at the surface with her hot soup and her waiting when the survivors came up. 4 of the 8 people who had entered the shaft that morning did not come with them. The accident directly led to the formation of the Cave Divers Association of Australia, established 4 months later, which introduced mandatory guidelines, equipment standards, and certification requirements that effectively eliminated cave diving fatalities in Australia for the following 25 years. The shaft was restricted, then regulated, then opened only to those who had been assessed and certified. The guest book still sits in the farmhouse. The hole in the paddock is still 3 feet wide, and somewhere in the development of every protocol and certification and safety requirement that governs cave diving in Australia today, there are 4 people who went into clear water on a May morning in 1973, swam past the line they had agreed not to cross, and found something in the dark that the light could not penetrate.